Hi there. Welcome to my series analyzing every piece of music from the comically large soundtrack to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We are still not in Costa del Sol, so we have to keep moving. Upper Junon is a big place, full of surprises, so let's get into it. With Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith having successfully conned their way into Shinra's 7th Infantry Division, it's finally time to enter the actual city of Upper Junon. Having covered 2 arrangements of Rufus's welcoming ceremony at the end of the last episode, we are immediately hit with a 3rd variation of the theme the moment we approach the street. If you recall, the first version we heard last episode was missing the main melody, and the second version had a choir singing the melody. By comparison, this 3rd version plays it pretty straight, following the general structure of the original, with relatively minor embellishments, most notably fleshing out the strings section, which is largely absent in the original. The PS1 version largely sticks to a traditional marching band setup, which is primarily a big family of percussion, woodwinds, and brass, i.e. the louder instruments you'd be able to make out in a noisy parade. For this arrangement, Furukawa keeps the emphasis on the brass, but the addition of strings alters the soundscape somewhat. You can hear it subtly complementing the brass sections throughout, but it's much more noticeable in the strings-only breakdown shortly before the loop point. This adds more pomp and class to the whole operation, which complements Upper Junon's architectural upgrade in Rebirth. It also pairs well with Junon's heritage as this once mighty republic. So Furukawa's strings add a bit of appropriate swank to Cloud's search for his missing soldiers. Speaking of, once Cloud finds half of his missing units, the music expands out its loop point to reveal a completely new arrangement of Shinra's full-scale assault. Last episode, we covered Shotaro Shima's somewhat moodier and introspective take on Shinra's full-scale assault, but Furukawa's here sticks much more closely to the original. That marching snare that drives the original track is much louder in the mix here than in Shima's, which also helps the track flow very naturally from the Rufus's welcoming ceremony section, and vice versa once we reach our new loop point. It's such a clever blending of the 2 themes. I love the contrast of Rufus's welcoming ceremony, which is this cheery, joyous facade that completely omits the Shinra leitmotif, followed by the true reveal of Shinra's aggressive and imperialistic intentions. Like a wolf in sheep's clothes. The fact that both tracks are written for brass-heavy marching band processions further seals the deal. Narratively and instrumentally, it's just too good. Well done. I also like that Furukawa includes the slightly lighter or goofier bridge. That section probably wouldn't have fit the gloomier tone of Shima's arrangement from last episode, so I'm glad it's included here. A bit of levity that again further makes the segue back into Rufus's welcoming ceremony that much smoother. Oh, and speaking of Shinra's full-scale assault, in the last episode I mentioned it doesn't show up until after Disc 1 of Final Fantasy VII. A few viewers pointed out to me that it actually shows up during the party's full-scale assault of Shinra HQ. Totally forgot about that. I remember now its omission in Remake felt noticeable, but in hindsight, I suspect this has to do with the developers trying to further associate this track with Junon events. Looks like it worked on me since I forgot about its wall market inclusion. Sooner or later, your hunt for missing infantry units will bring you to the snazzy bar known as Le Sourire. You'll find some of your men here, as well as a down-on-her-luck Elena, but better than all of that is the awesome jazz band serenading the venue. They're playing a killer arrangement of The Chase, or better known as Crazy Motorcycle to Your Mom. Subbing out the synth line for the piano is an inspired choice, but I have to take slight umbrage with the band we are seeing here inside the bar. What we see is a pianist, what looks like a tenor saxophonist, a drummer, and a double bassist. But what we hear tells a different story. We've got the drummer, pianist, bass player, not one but two harmonizing wind instruments panned left and right, an acoustic guitar, and an organ lower in the mix. This is actually a 7-piece band. Those extra 3 musicians must be hiding behind the curtain. Understandable considering the small size of the stage. Also, to me, neither of those wind instruments sound like a tenor saxophone. My best guess was a trumpet panned left and a clarinet panned right, but it turns out I was doubly wrong. This track was actually taken from the fantastic Square Enix Jazz Final Fantasy VII album that came out around the time of Remake. There are no duds on this jazz arrangement album, and a few of these made it into Remake in the form of collectible jukebox tracks. Anyway, the physical version of this album includes a detailed breakdown of who played what, and turns out it's a trombone and a soprano saxophone. Wow, turns out all this time I have been seriously sleeping on the soprano saxophone, because that thing is awesome. It looks like a clarinet made of brass, hence my initial confusion. Beautiful sound. Up there with the bassoon as one of the most underappreciated instruments. The liner notes also revealed that the visuals tricked me, and it isn't a double bass, but in fact an electric bass. And the electric bass player, Ryu Kawamura, is also that track's arranger. I hadn't heard of Kawamura before, but upon scrolling through his VGMDB discography, turns out I have heard a lot of Kawamura over the years. From Gravity Rush, to Nier, to Xenoblade, goddamn, the man and his bass have touched half of my all-time favorite soundtracks. Also, Takana Miyamoto is credited as both pianist and organist, so maybe it's actually a 6-piece band, not 7. While scouring the streets of Upper Junon for your missing units, you'll eventually come across Rude entering a mysterious-looking tavern called the Glabrescent.
What's going on? What's going on?
Fishy.
The Glabrescent bar, and Rude is on the cover too of this bar. Oh boy.
I don't know what I expected to find down there, but it wasn't this. Yeah, it's a bar exclusively for bald folks. Of course it is. Upon entering, you can hear its patrons joyously chanting their anthem, Ballad of the Bald, Shine Bright My Son, which might go down in history as the best name for any piece of music ever. That's some Michael Christopher Koji Fox caliber localization. The Japanese version, which refers to them as skinheads, is a bit of a loaded term, so I can see why they changed it here. Anyhow, I'm not sure where to start with this one. Surprising absolutely no one, this is, of course, a Mitsuto Suzuki composition, quite likely at his most unhinged yet. It was co-arranged by Suzuki and frequent collaborator Kengo Tokusashi. Or at least that's who's credited with arranging the version included on the 8-disc special edit version of the Rebirth soundtrack. But curiously, that OST version isn't the one featured here in Chapter 4, or possibly anywhere in the game. But before I get to that one, let me start by laying out the versions you hear in-game. The The first version is the one that scores this cutscene here. This version has vocals for only the opening 10 seconds, at which point it switches to an instrumental arrangement. Primarily a slightly out of tune upright piano, an accordion, and a triangle to punctuate the comedic moments in the cutscene. On the second verse, they add what sounds like someone whistling, a kick, and some cymbals. That's the cutscene version of the track, and of course, there are two versions depending on if you're playing in Japanese or in English. After the cutscene wraps up, it switches to a diegetic version of the track on the radio, lovingly labeled SP_skinhead_EN_000 or SP_skinhead_JP_000, depending on if you're playing in EN or in JP. And yes, skinhead is capitalized. This version is essentially the 10-second long vocals intro of the cutscene version, but expanded out into a full song. There's also a radio-style filter on the audio file, so its frequency bandwidth is seriously compromised. Also, side note, where is this music coming from? All the other diegetic tracks we've covered have had a very obvious sound source, but I haven't been able to find an actual radio or anything in this bar. The direction of the audio seems to be coming from above, so maybe this place just has some nice Sonos speakers installed in the ceiling or something. Anyhow, you might think that this diegetic version here is the same as the one included on the official soundtrack, but no, the soundtrack version is much grander. The beginning is quite similar to the version in the cutscene, although the cutscene version has at least one additional rowdier singer in there. Afterward, for the rest of the first verse, the track mostly follows the same structure as the diegetic radio version. It's only once we get to verse 2 that things really change. Suddenly, big reverby marching drums make way for a much more bombastic arrangement. We've got a whole marching band procession at this point, and it's not just the percussion that's changed. The flute whistle thing has been subbed out with some much louder wind instruments, like maybe a kazoo or some sort of shawm. Not sure what exactly, but combined with the marching band percussion, it makes me wonder if at some point in development, there might have been a Ballad of the Bald procession within the upcoming Rufus welcoming parade. I wonder if that was a whole sequence that was cut for whatever reason, leaving us only with this vastly embellished, not very taverny version of the track. Maybe they felt the parade sequence was long enough as is, or more likely, they just didn't have the time to implement it into the game. That's my theory, at least. Could be dead wrong, but either way, I think this might be the only track on the Rebirth original soundtrack that is not in Rebirth. I mean, the soundtrack versions of tracks like Shape of My Love, which we covered in part 14, sounds clearer than the radio filtery version in-game, but it's still the same song, but just without the filter. In the case of Ballad of the Bald, it's not just an EQ thing. It's a pretty different mix altogether. It also implies that there exists an English version of this loftier, quote-unquote, parade version of Ballad of the Bald that we have never heard. Very curious. Anyhow, fun track. Is it Suzuki's greatest composition? Oh no. Is it the second hardest I've laughed playing Rebirth? Absolutely. Kudos to Suzuki for consistently nailing the assignment. At long last, we've finally found all 10 units of the 7th Infantry, and wow, what a squad it is. It's time to get ready for the show by presenting ourselves to our new our new commander. The parade is about to begin, but first, Cloud needs to give everyone one final pep talk. Yeah, Cloud flubs the beginning, but with the help of his friends, he mostly sticks the landing. I think the same is true of this track. As Cloud fumbles the start of his speech, the track complements it with maybe the most aggressively generic, uplifting chord progression in all of Rebirth. The melody laid over top of the progression when Aerith and Tifa pipe up alleviates things a little bit, but yeah, it's mega corny. Once Cloud finds his resolve, however, so too does the track, which mostly ditches the original chord progression for something equally invigorating, but more sincere. The lively build-up into the Let the Battles Begin ascending motif is pretty cool, blending the cheese with a bit of sincerity.
He's on fire!
You can sense Cloud and the 7th Infantry are actually motivated now. So it's quite a two-faced track. I think you could argue the first half's on-the-nose motivational music as Cloud bombs the speech is an intentional semi-comedic moment, which is further contrasted with the second half's narrative and musical sincerity. I'm not entirely sure that gels, but if nothing else, just like Cloud, they stuck the landing, so I won't harp on it any more than that. Moving on. Following Cloud's eventually rousing speech, we cut to Rufus in his office once again, giving the order to dust off the old Sister Ray cannon as a means of ringing in his new era with a bang. And would you believe it, we've got ourselves another slow, moody variation of the Shinra theme, once more likely arranged by Yoshitaka Suzuki. Compared to the two likely Suzuki arrangements of the Shinra theme we covered in the last episode, this one is a touch more ominous, partially because this one lacks any sort of percussive kick drum to drive it forward, but it's also just a touch slower to begin with. The higher-pitched synth pad with the long reverby tail gives the track a tiny bit more character. There's something a bit eerie there, but I don't want to read too much into it. I'm sure there are all sorts of secrets hidden inside Suzuki's most unassuming tracks, but to me this one here seems pretty straightforward. Nothing to write home about, but its muted eeriness juxtaposes the upcoming parade festivities quite nicely. And speaking of the parade, Cloud's got a big performance ahead of him, so I think we'll call it there for today. Best to give the lad a chance to rest up. So please look forward to the parade and its exciting aftermath in the next few episodes. And if you're enjoying this series, please consider backing my Patreon or leaving a super thanks donation on YouTube. It's really only thanks to Patreon and the super thanks that I can commit the time that this series really needs. But of course, commenting, liking, and sharing is also fantastic and very helpful. However you can help, thank you so much. Okay, look forward to part 18. Until then, take care. Bye. .23 in the afternoon. Caught a train heading for Shinra HQ. Knew I needed to get topside to get some more answers. Next suspect was one Mr. Keiki Kobayashi. You might remember him for his rousing boss battle track against one of those prototype flying machine doodads back in Final Fantasy VII Remake. But beyond that, not a whole lot to go on. Decided I'd see if I could squeeze someone from Shinra's weapons division, see if I could get a closer look at one of those Valkyrie prototypes. Figured I might be able to get a clearer picture if I got up close. Snuck into their swanky cafeteria and started asking around. Completely fruitless. Tell you what, that director of advanced weaponry must run one tight ship. Everyone seems terrified of her. But on the contrary, the nerds in the space and aeronautics department needed little prodding to start yapping. Seems I'd hit the jackpot.
Yeah, I know Kobayashi.
The man spilled information freely. Told me his boss, Director Palmer, was out of town on some top secret mission, so he was feeling particularly relaxed.
Moved over to weapons with that Valkyrie track he made a few years back. Seemed like a natural fit for him, but if you ask me, his heart still belongs to aeronautics.
What makes you say that?
Ever heard of Ace Combat? It's a long-running combat flight simulation video game series. Mr. Kobayashi, well, Ace Combat was his baby. He was lead composer on several of those. Ace Combat 4, 5, 6, 7, really you name it.
Sorry, did you just say 7? That's my favorite number. I paid for the man's drink then left HQ. That's all I needed to get from here. Went to the local mom and pop game store and picked up a used copy of Ace Combat 7. Took the game home, cranked the volume and started playing. By midnight, I knew all you could ever want to know about Ace Combat 7 and Mr. Kobayashi's writing style. The man's got range, I'll give him that. Whole lot of twangy bluegrass guitar, serene synth pads, and of course a whole slew of big bombastic orchestral tracks that sound a whole lot like his remake track, The Valkyrie. Tracks like Gunther Bay and Rescue show me a man comfortable blending hard rock and symphonic. Chugging guitars, synth lines, yeah, there's something to this. I think we've got ourselves a front runner. But best not to count your Choco Chicks before they all hatch. We've still got one last suspect to look into. After an evening of sleuthing around Wall Market, I caught wind of Mr. Masaya Tsunemoto having been last seen gallivanting somewhere in the Corel Desert. Caught the last ferry ride out of Junon bound for Costa del Sol. Killed time aboard by catching up with the latest episode of the YouTuber's Rebirth Music Analysis series. If this man could stop talking about Shima this or Shima that for 1 second, he might have been able to reach Chapter 8 by now and save me this trip across the ocean. Bah, at least the drinks are cheaper here than back at the Honeybee Inn. Once we landed in Costa del Sol, I made a beeline for Corel. It was my first time getting to visit the Big Sauce, as we like to say, so I grabbed a few souvenirs for the road. Also met an overstuffed Moogle that seemed plenty eager to read my fortune. Not interested, I told him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. Fine. Decided to humor the overstuffed robot, but immediately wished I hadn't. He spat out a piece of paper. Grave misfortune, it read, followed by some sort of poem. An island left within your wake calls back to you for your own sake. A soaring tune that's full and clear. Before it starts to disappear, have you perhaps made some mistake? The hell does that mean? I asked, but when I looked up, the Moogle was gone. Shoved this so-called fortune into my coat pocket and continued on my way. Even though Mr. Tsunemoto was nowhere to be found in Gold Saucer, North Corel, or the Corel prison, I at least got a good taste of his rebirth sound as I traipsed around this lousy dust bowl. Yeah, I found a good half-dozen varied arrangements of various character themes, a handful of Barrett tracks, a Yuffie, a Red 13, and I hate to say it, but none of them sound like my client's theme. The only thing that came close was his take on the Desert Wasteland, whose crunchy bass guitar and electric lead had a certain swagger to him that reminded me of my client's cocky mug. I know. It's not a whole lot to go on. I was about to scratch his name off the list when it struck me. Something wasn't adding up. Those Tsunemoto tracks, Those are all just arrangements of old songs from the 1990s. They're cold cases, all of them. Yet the suspect's name was right there in the list of Rebirth's composers, meaning there's at least one mystery Mr. Tsunemoto composition hiding somewhere in Rebirth. Could it be my client's theme? I felt it was too early to say. All of his arrangements of Uematsu character themes didn't tell me one lick of what his actual compositions sound like. Had to keep digging. Folks out in the sandpit kept pretty tight-lipped, but I was able to glean a few nuggets of wisdom. We have to rewind the clock a couple decades to find some examples of Mr. Tsunemoto's original compositions. Working at Tosei, he's credited with co-composing the score of the PlayStation 2 video game spin-off of The Nightmare Before Christmas called Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas Oogie's Revenge. But the majority of that score is just arrangements of musical numbers lifted right from the movie, while the other half are slavishly trying to emulate the feel of Danny Elfman's original score. It didn't tell me nothing about Mr. Tsunemoto's actual compositional style. Or so I thought. His only other notable composer credit is for Tosei's Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins for the PlayStation Portable, which feels just as campy and spooky as the Nightmare Before Christmas score. Maybe this is just what he sounds like then. Or at least what he sounded like over 20 years ago. I know from experience, people can change if you give them time. I don't want to write off Mr. Tsunemoto from my list just because of 2 games Capcom published a lifetime ago. Wait. Capcom. I'm getting too old for this. I needed a drink, fast. So I made my way to the local drinking hole, the Bail Jumper. But everything on tap looked like piss, so I opted for a coffee instead. Black as a moonless night. Parked myself at the bar and decided to gather my thoughts. Between Mr. Tsunemoto's mystery composition and the high-energy rock and roll of Mr. Kobayashi's Ace Combat compositions, I started thinking the evidence against Mr. Reo Uratani and Mr. Tadayoshi Makino was beginning to seem pretty flimsy. Yeah, I think those 2 are off the list. They can join the Nakano, Shima, Furukawa, and Kataoka in the rejects pile. So I was down to 2. But still, something seemed wrong. Had I made some mistake? I began to pull out the cryptic fortune I'd received earlier when suddenly I was interrupted by the sound of gunshots and a roaring engine. Looked like some hooligans were trying to break out of here, but hang on a minute. Did you hear that? That rocking guitar? That high energy, that big free-spirited nature, the funky breakdown. Now that's a track my client could get behind. I dashed out of the bar, knocking my mug of coffee on the way out. Sorry, I yelled back in a hurry. Put it on my tab. Fortune awaits.
Yes, sir. Precisely. He completely fell for it. No, he hasn't made that connection yet. He should be off his tail for good now. Yes, of course. And if he ever does catch on, we can lure him back with the harmony of sound. Yes, very well. Whatever you say, Colonel.